One of the biggest concerns with IntraWeb 17 that users have expressed with us is how compatible it will be, because they see all the new controls and the capabilities and they wonder if it's going to introduce big breaking changes in their applications. And the good news is it will not break anything. In fact, the way that 17 integrates, it integrates as an add-on to the existing 15 base. It introduces a new page type. So when you're building your applications, you can create a type 15 page or a type 17 page, and you can mix and match as many of these pages as you want in a single application. They will always share the same session, and all of the server features available in 15 are also available in 17. Now the demo I'm going to show you soon is a pretty simplistic demo with only 2 pages, but you can add as many pages as you want and go back and forth seamlessly, even sharing data sets between 15 and 17 pages, which I'm also going to show. Now, before we get to that, this is the preview designer. This is part of the reason for the major delay in IntraWeb 17. The original IntraWeb 17 plan was to not have a designer and just have the runtime code, and you would have had to edit IWML, and the feedback we got was that we really needed to spend the time on the designer. So we've embarked on the designer, and this has introduced, of course, quite a delay into the original timeline. But as you can see here, the designer is pretty advanced. But even the designer itself, when release 17, will be a preview designer. It'll be fully functional, but the runtime will be a release code. So for example, what will you get in the preview? For example, when you add controls, you have to find them. You can search them, but you have to add them by looking up just their names. This is similar to the tool palette in Delphi. You don't really get the preview, but you will in the future. But you can see that I can interact directly with things, and this is one that was based on a Bootstrap template. But let's move on to show you how it integrates directly between the two. So for example, here I have IntraWeb 15. This is the runtime package and the design time package, and I also have IntraWeb 17, and these are both loaded and running at the same time. And the 17 packages depend directly on the 15 packages. They can't run without them. Now when we release 17, they'll probably be reduced down to a single package, but you can see here that it's based on the same code, and this is why it's highly compatible. So what I'm going to do here is show you my one of the demos here called data, and I already have the pages here. This one, for example, is a 17 page. When you click on it, you can see here the design class is a T17 page, and this one is a TIW app form, which is the type 15 page. Now when I add new pages, you'll see here we have the existing 15 types. We also have, if I want to add a 17 page, I just select that. Now that I have these, let's take a quick look at them. So here's the 17 page, and this is part of the temporary designer. Just click on this, and then you get what you see is what you get designer. And what's pretty cool is even though this is an actual designer and I can edit things, for example, if I want to edit, I want to change this to say edit me. Now it'll say edit me. But some things I can preview live, even though I'm not actually running the application. I can change the number of rows I want to see. Let's resize it a little bit wider. I can do searching. So there's some pretty neat stuff you can do. And what's neat about this too is you can run not only server-side code. For example, the edit me button, if we come over here, you'll see it has a server click event. So let's take a look at the code. Here's the code for it. So that's the server side, and it just gets the selected key from the table, which is selected on the client side but automatically communicated back to the server side. And then this right here creates and shows the 15 page. Now let's go back over here for a second. Okay, now the next button, in this one we don't execute server side, and you can actually execute both client and server, but in this case I'm going to execute just server side code, just client side code, so we don't have to hit the server every time just to move to the next record. So we insert this line of code here, and if I have multiple lines I can open an editor here by clicking this, but in a lot of cases, as here, I just have one line. I'm just going to move it to the next record. Now this is a client side move, but what's neat about this is this table is bound to a data source which is on my user session, which I'm using like a data module, and that single data source is shared by both the 15 and the 17 application. So if I edit it in the 15 page, it'll show up in the 17 page as change, and we're going to show that as well. Now these ones up here have data binding, but they have a new form of data binding. They're not using server-side binding, they're using client-side binding. I can bind any property. For example, if I wanted to bind the text property, I could come up to bindings, and I could bind the text property here. And if it was an input control, such as an edit box, it would be a two-way binding. But this is a label, so of course there's no input, so it's one way. But in this case, I didn't want to use two labels. I wanted to use one label. So in the text property, what I did is I used what's called IntraWeb 17 Markdown. And I put the text I wanted to see. And then inside square brackets, I put a binding expression. Now this Markdown can be used for formatting as well. You can use it to create in-text links, styles such as bold, italics, those sorts of things. But you can also do one-way data binding within a Markdown expression. So in this case, I put equals users, which is the data set I'm binding to, and name field. So it'll put it right here. And you can see even at design time, I'm still getting that binding. And where that comes from is if I select the page, each page has a list of data sources. So this one has one called users. And the users, I can point it, if I want REST, I can put in a URL and pull it directly from REST. Or in this case, what I've done is I pointed it at a data set or a data source, which is on my user session right here. So here's my T-client data set. But in 17, because of the terminology, sometimes they're called data source, sometimes called data set. But we use a data source to point at a data set, so it connects the two of them. And that's here. And this one is also shared by my 15 page. So let's take a look at the 15 page here. And nothing really fancy here, but this one uses server-side binding. So I have a data set here which points at the data source on the user session. And then I just use a standard binding to bind them. And then I have two events back here. I have the cancel button and the save button, and one just does a post and one does a cancel, and does a release, which will then go back to the 17 form. Okay, let's run the application. Okay, so here I have my application running in Chrome, and you can see if I do the next, it'll navigate through the data, but it does it on the client side. It's not making any server calls. And although I'm connected to a standard Delphi data set there, in this case a client data set, what happens is it'll automatically convert it into a JSON REST call. So it actually sent it down to the client as a REST call for a transparently. I didn't have to create any REST endpoints. All I did was connect the 17 data source to the standard data set in Delphi. Now once I have any one of these, if I click this is going to execute the server code, which will then open the 15 page. And I have the one that I selected. I have Josh Smith, so I can change him to Josh Jones, and I can change his name to whatever I want to be, or any other changes I need to make, and I can either cancel or save. So let's save it, and when we go back, you'll see we're going to go back to the 17 page, and now it's been changed both on the client and the server side.